Hi, everyone. My name is Aditi Chadha, and I am the Youth Program Lead here at Co.Labs. I'm super excited to welcome you to panel 3 of the Co.Learn Founder Speaker Series. So whether this is your first panel that you're joining us for, or you're back from the past few weeks, we're super excited to have you. So to bring everyone up to speed, this series is part of the Co.Learn program. This program has been built with the support of our friends over at Western Economic Diversification Canada to help young people in Saskatchewan become tech founders and tech company employees. And with this in mind, we've created a speaker series to bring you 4 panels featuring incredible Saskatchewan-based founders talking about their experiences, their failures, and demystifying what it really takes to be a tech founder. So today we have a virtual fireside chat with our speaker, and we'll be doing Q&A a little bit differently this time. So throughout the panel, you can submit questions and we'll make sure to push the questions through right away to our moderator. So make sure you're really quick about it, and we'll make sure that all of your questions get answered. And like always, I'll be back at the very end to tell you about next week's panel and tell you about our speaker series draw that we have going on. So back to today's panel. This one's actually centered around one speaker, which is different than the past panels that we've had. And we've done this because he has a very interesting story to tell. And to help him tell this story, we actually have Co.Labs' very own program director, Alex Shimla. Alex's role at Co.Labs is quite expansive, so it would probably take me till 6 o'clock if I told you everything that he does. But as program director, his primary focus is on program design and development for Co.Labs' core programs and company mentorship. And with that, I'll pass it off to Alex. I'll let him come on. There we go. All right, have fun. See you guys at the end.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited that you gave a description of my title because I still struggle at times to piece that one together. So as Didi mentioned, my name is Alex. I'm the program director at Co.Labs, so handle all of our programs, a little bit of our marketing and everything in between. It's been a blast, been here for the last 3 years, and I've got to see a lot of incredible founder stories, a lot of really incredible founders, a lot of really incredible companies, and then the opposite is also true, right? So I think today is designed to showcase kind of, that we always hear the success stories and we always hear about we always want to talk about the next big thing. And I think it's important to reflect on things that just didn't work out and kind of examine why. So today we're going to have Tyler Rampton join us. Tyler, if you want to unmute yourself and turn on your camera. I'm happy we both figured that out. I was honestly worried for a little bit. I always give our panelists crap when they can't figure it out, so it's good. But yeah, Tyler, let's jump right into this. And maybe before we do, again, Q&A is open the whole time here. So any questions you guys have, they'll pop up on a screen that I'm looking at right now. So if you see me doing that, it means I'm gearing up to ask a question. We'd love to have it. Just kind of keeps the flow engaging. Obviously, since you can't be with us here physically, you can pester us digitally, and that would be just as helpful. So Tyler, who are you? What's your story? What do you got going on?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. So my name's Tyler Rampton. I am from Saskatoon originally. I'm a tech founder. So I did my undergrad in engineering physics, actually, in Saskatoon. I'm going to go back a bit and kind of tell my story about where I went. But originally I came to Saskatoon, did my undergrad in engineering physics. Really loved it, really loved the problem solving. I worked with USST. I did a couple of summer projects, one out in Copenhagen in Denmark, working in the medical field. I worked on some satellite projects in the summer, and I really fell in love with tech. From there, I kind of, after school, I went and got a job with Solido Design Automation as an applications engineer. I was with them for about a year, working with big companies like SK Hynix, Apple, working with them on building their chips and kind of working with their engineers to do that. And then after that is kind of where like the story that I'm really looking forward to telling you and talking to everyone else about is the startup space. So when I was at Solido, I actually was talking to some friends who I went to school with, and they were looking at starting a company. So from there, I kind of jumped on. We moved down to California, and I'll get into that more, but from there, we live this startup life. So I'm an engineer I've tried the startup. I've tried a couple startups. I'm now working in tech in Saskatoon, and really like the scene here. So,
yeah, I think it's a pretty incredible transition just to even think about, landing a job at Solido is one of the most prestigious things that can happen to any engineering grad. And so it really speaks to your passion around solving, these kinds of problems that, you look at that and you're like, most people just be like, I have it made. But I think sometimes the pursuit of something more is kind of what carries most founders. So it's always super interesting here.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Solido was a really good time. I got in when they were around 40 people. So we were still like very early on. They were still growing very fast. Like a lot to learn, a lot of great people to meet, learned a lot about the business. And then from there, yeah, we got the offer to move down to California. So we actually accepted that. So that was kind of the end of my time at Solido. We moved down for 3.5 months to start a company with Boost VC, who's a venture cap company run by Adam Draper, who's the son of Tim Draper, who's like a 3rd generation VC down there to live at Draper University with 25 other startups, I believe, and kind of take our shot at building a company.
Yeah, so, and I'll just provide a couple points of clarification for the audience. So if you haven't heard of Solido, it's one of the most incredible like hidden tech companies in Saskatoon. They designed something like 2/3 of your the chips in your actual iPhones or something like that. And my math is probably slightly off, but it's a substantial number is I think the point here. And then, speaking to the next part of Tyler's story about moving to San Francisco from Saskatoon to an accelerator program. If you're not familiar with what an accelerator program is, they're common in Silicon Valley where they'll write a check into your company. They get an equity investment in return. And part of their pitch is that they can, in a very short period of time, cause disproportionate growth by introducing you to people down in the valley, to introducing you to investors, and to generally help you think critically. So maybe let's explore that kind of portion of the Tyler Rampton story a little bit more here. So it's like you're in Saskatoon, you have, for all intents and purposes, a dream job, and you make the decision to go to Boost VC in San Francisco. Why? Like, what was that thought process like? What did it feel like?
So great question. So it was a hard decision. I mean, like it always is when if you're like in a career, you're in school, it's very comfortable. It's very easy to like enjoy who you are and go with it. But at the same time, the idea and the stories I heard behind Silicon Valley from the people who referred us, like the experiences they had, the people they met, the opportunities they had, it's kind of a different world. And, like I said, it was terrifying to do, to decide to quit a well-paying job with a great growing company to essentially work for free for a company that would be our own and move, to a place where I knew nobody. Before I moved down there, I didn't know anyone. But when you're young, I mean, that's when you make these moves, right? Like for me, it was an opportunity and it was a chance that I just thought was really worth it. And it's pretty rare, but you kind of have to, make your own path. So that was kind of like the jump, the leap of faith kind of moment was just like, there's too much opportunity here to give up.
Got it. No, I think it speaks to a lot of the decisions as a founder. You got to pursue the best available option all the time. So maybe a natural segue from there is like, how did you actually come up with your idea? So you apply to this program. I think everyone's always curious. It's probably one of our top asked questions. Like, how do you come up with an idea? What does that actually look like? So what was your process?
Yeah, so this is actually a really good story. And if you want to stop me to ask me questions throughout it, like go for it. Because for us, we went through multiple ideas. And this was like one of the most interesting things of our story, because when I got brought into the team, we were actually an AR company. We were looking in augmented reality, and that was what our initial investment was in. And that idea actually came before I was part of the team. But the interesting thing was we moved down to California. And so for like context, like we packed our bags, we got a check in the bank, like we had money, we moved to California. We're there for 3 months with like 20 some like great teams on great products. And day 2, we flushed out our idea and we're like, it's not going to work. Like it's not going to work. And I remember being absolutely terrified because I'm like, we just accepted money from these investors. We moved down here and we have something that like we don't think is going to work. And I was terrified to tell them, but like I talked to them and they're like, yeah, like see that company there, they're on their 3rd idea on day 2. So like that was like a really eye-opening thing for us, where like in the Valley, a lot of companies pivot and a lot of people work on multiple ideas. So, you know, that's kind of what we did. We put our heads down, we looked at a lot of the spaces that we were interested in, and we started talking to people who we knew who were in industries that we wanted to potentially work in, and trying to find out their problems so that we could then, you know, find a solution in that space. So kind of the first one that we actually came up after the augmented reality, the AR play, was actually into the net zero homes. So we were actually looking at smart home technology in like a green area for net zero homes, because at the time, this was back in like 2016, smart homes were just starting to boom. There was a lot of companies. There was the acquisition of Samsung of Smart Things. And there were a lot of pushes, both political and business, for a lot of greener energy and greener homes. And there were actually some bylaws that were going to be coming through in California. So, you know, we called people, we vetted it with our investors, we did as much work as we could, and it got to the point where like, look, we think we have a problem here. Now it's time to, like, you know, again, put the head down and start working on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have a question here, and so I'll pose it. It's from a, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing their name right, anonymous attendee. What was the San Francisco tech scene like? Did it actually live up to the hype?
Great question. Honestly, yeah, it was crazy. I remember so we were living in a place called San Mateo. It's a couple train stops south of San Francisco. And I remember going to Mountain View to visit some guys I met from the Google campus. And like on the train down from where I was staying to the Google campus, like everyone was on their laptop programming or doing like marketing pitches, or like prepping a pitch deck. Like everyone had a MacBook or a laptop with like company stickers, and it just, everyone's really like invested in technology or in businesses. And because of that, it was just like you met really cool people just on the train to places or talking to places. There were a ton of lectures on, at the time, there's a lot of machine learning and a lot of cryptocurrency talks, like every day at Facebook headquarters, Google. And yeah, it was fun. Like it was honestly like a great 3 months.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like instead of having diamond rings that people show off there, it's like Uber 47, and you just know it's like they're anointed. It's like that's good as gold down there. Okay, cool. Let's chat about kind of like coming back. So Boost, again, short. It's an accelerator program. It's meant to just kick you in the ass, get you going as fast as you can in the shortest period of time. You guys could have stayed. You guys could have came back. You guys could have moved to a different city. Why come back to Saskatoon after being in San Francisco at Boost?
It's a tough question. Like that's honestly a tough question. We got asked this all the time. So we were down there, we raised money, and the question was, and we got this from our investors all the time, because they would ask us this when we were pitching them before they'd write us checks. They would say, are you staying here or are you going back? And there's really interesting sentiment, and like it can go really both ways. But some investors really want you to come back to Canada because you can spread out your runway longer. And honestly, there is a better work-life balance. And it was at the point where like we were all getting a little tired too. I mean, we were waking up and working from 7 in the morning till 11 p.m. every day, because that's what everyone did. We would wake up in our like the incubator we were at, they owned like a hotel, so we all lived in it, and we'd walk across the street, and then we had this like workspace, and you would get there at 7 in the morning, and like 3/4 of the people were already there, heads down programming, and you were like, oh man, like I got to get here 10 minutes early. And then, you know, at 10 p.m. they're all still working, and it just like it drives you to keep going. But after doing that for 3 months, I mean, when we finished our demo day, when we pitched to like hundreds of VCs, it was like, hey, well, like we have the idea, we have funding now, like, you know, there is a part of us that like wants to have some like work-life balance, be able to go back to Canada, extend our runway, find talented people for within the competition, because in California you're competing with like Apple, Google, like all the engineers are going to these big companies. So we came home, like refreshed. We were also working with a number of companies in Canada, so it was easier to be back for us. It was a hard decision, and like we did go back often. Like we went back to meet with investors and like stay at the VC space to get like that change of perspective. But that's kind of where the decision came from.
Yeah, I think it's always a multifaceted, right? It's never just like, well, it was obvious, A or B. It's always like there's 100 variables, and you just kind of got to go with your gut at some point. Uh, Again, guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them in at any time here. It's always fun to kind of, take the audience's feedback. Again, given that we can't have you here physically, always great to get you guys' opinions on this. You alluded to this a little bit earlier, and I think it's worth exploring a bit around like, you came into Boost with this set, you joined up, you guys had this AR platform, and then it very quickly changed along that path. But even past Boost, you guys were always pursuing the problem and were never kind of married to what you had built in front of you. And that's a tough thing to do as a founder. So I think it'd be helpful to illustrate kind of like how I'll call it the company, because there was many names, evolved over time. What was the pivots actually like? What kind of drove those business decisions?
Yeah, totally. So like starting from the beginning, like the first scary wall we hit was like, we're an AR company. And the point that actually like made us pivot from that was, it was less that we didn't believe that there weren't consumers or a market for it. It's that like we knew, and we met people who had the exact same company shelved because they already had the product ready in the technology. But like, it wasn't the time, it was too early. And like, being too early is wrong, it's just being wrong. And there wasn't the market for it. And even if there was the market for it, we weren't positioned to take it because there were other players in the game. So, we pivoted, like you said, we're down there, we want to be agile. But we had to tell the investors and talk to them. And that was the first kind of wall. And we broke through it, and they were happy with it. And like, we picked a new idea and we moved to the net zero space. We were in the net zero space for quite a while. We were dealing with some of the largest like construction investors in the States. We were dealing with like a lot of building groups, some of the largest like skyrise developers down there, and actually a couple like developers here in Canada, in Saskatoon, Manitoba. We're talking to some residential developers, and we were trying to figure out if we would go like small business private or like large scale enterprise. And like, where could our tech fit? Where would we build trust? And as we went through that, again, we started hitting these traction points, right? Like, you're not going to get like a skyscraper deal until you've done multi like residential buildings. And to do residential buildings, a big problem we ran into was the turnaround time is over 12 months, especially for net zero homes. Like, to go through the building stage, designing phase, to actually doing it, and then like completing it, and then recording metrics and data on it is over a year. And for a startup that wants to move fast and has a set runway, we can't burn that, right? So we looked at doing other things like retrofitting, and like all of this again takes months, because you can try to have these conversations as fast as you can, but like, we had deals, we were looking at going to conferences, people were pulling us in, and like stuff looked great. But like, again, you need that time, right? Stuff needs to settle. And I think what you said, Alex, is it's really easy to fall in love with your product. And it's really easy to like tell yourself that like, this is going to work, I'm going to make it work. And there's nothing wrong with that. You need that as a founder. But that outside perspective and like really analyzing those friction points to be able to tell you when to drive through it or pivot is important also. So, we went from the smart home space net zero, from enterprise to small biz to retrofitting. And at that point, we were just having the same issue that Google and Amazon were having, was that smart home equipment wasn't selling. Like, they had this huge predicted market, they had this huge predicted consumer base. But at the same time, there were a lot of conflicting stats of how many people under 25 were actually buying brand new homes, or even buying just like any homes and retrofitting it with tens of thousands of dollars of smart equipment to be like net zero, like very low. And the ones that are using like customized solutions where someone comes in for an extra $100,000 and just retrofits the whole place. They're not using off the shelf consumer products. So an interesting thing here was like, we actually had such a friction point just getting like bought in consumers, that we actually built another product just to increase our top of funnel. Like, we built a product just to help people find smart home products cheaply to get them in their house that they could then use our tool. And again, it got to the point where like the turnaround time, the time for adoption, it was just like, it was crazy, right? And we were fighting market forces, and like, we had to keep pivoting because we had we wanted to move fast for investors. We had things that we believed in and wanted to build, but like at the same time, like we want to build something that we know is going to be used by consumers and provides value. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing, is you want to create a business that can give value to consumers. And I can go a bit past that. But like up to that point, those, that was the first year of the company. It was like 4 or 5 pivots moving through and just trying to like find that target, find that road that we wanted to go down.
Yeah, what we'll do is I'll ask you we have some more questions that have come in. And I think it's I just want to make a key kind of takeaway from what Tyler just said there, which is like, as a founder, you have to have a little bit of hubris to have this idea that you're going to change the world in the first place. And so sometimes that lends itself to, falling deeper and deeper in love with your product and not wanting to listen to anyone. But I think it's an important, delicate balance to have as a founder. It's like being so confident that you can change the world, but still being malleable enough to understand that your idea probably isn't perfect and, probably never will be. And you should always pursue what that actually looks like at the core of it. I think it's super important to kind of define that why early on so that you don't get lost in the how and the what's. Okay, so we have a question from what I can only imagine is a distant or close relative of anonymous attendee, being that they have the same name. Does being relatively young and recently graduated give you an edge in the valley? Or how do you get people to take you seriously? I know that's something founders up here struggle with. Does it matter there? Is it different?
Honestly, like, again, another great question. It's definitely nerve-wracking. Like when I got down there, like going and talking to some people, like you're intimidated. There's people who have like, they came out of Stanford or they came out of Google, or like, it is like, how am I going to make these people take me seriously? But honestly, they do. I mean, a lot of VCs will tell you like they hear all these ideas because they want to hear every idea. They're not going to turn ideas away because they don't know what's going to work and not. So just like honestly putting yourself out there a bit, taking those risks and talking to people, that's how you're going to learn. That's how you're going to get meetings. And honestly, like that itself gives you an edge. Like you want to put yourself in rooms where everyone is smarter than you so that you learn from them. And being like young and recently graduated and showing that, you didn't go with like a 9-to-5 job and you moved to a different country to pursue something that, like Alex said earlier, you were going to move mountains to make something of. Like you were going to build this product. That drives a respect of its own. And like people will see that and they'll respect that and like they'll listen to you. And not everyone will, but it's like majority will. And like that's where you're going to get places.
Yeah, it's the culture of the long shot, right? Like, the idea is that we're going to have some people who create tremendously outsized value. And so you don't want to be the guy who refused or the girl who refused the meeting because of someone's age, I think, right? It's kind of a paradox there. We'll have another question here from Adam Jones, which I definitely pronounced right, I can almost guarantee. What skill sets did you learn at your time at USST that you feel best complemented your engineering physics background? For context, he's currently in Eng Phys and on USST as well. I'm assuming you know what the acronym means, so.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a space team. Got it. Yeah. All right.
Honestly, like the best, no matter what you do, what team you're on, what projects you take on, what internships, what jobs you take, the best thing I can say is like, learn to learn and learn how to take criticisms and get told like you're wrong. Like a big thing of startups is like, and I'll get into this like later on, but like you have to wear multiple hats. So like I came out of engineering, but I became the CEO and suddenly I was doing accounting and legal work and building a company that had to adhere to federal and provincial guidelines. And I had to work with the team and hire people. And like, that's not something I learned in school or in USST, but there's parts of that you can learn from those scenarios, like being in USST and working on group projects or projects yourself. Learning when to do it yourself versus learning when to delegate is a huge skill of anyone in a startup, because you're going to want to do everything yourself, but you don't have the time. And like, you're going to have to learn those like balances. And the first thing I said, like learning how to learn is, I think, like a huge skill, because again, because you're wearing these hats, you might have to learn front-end development. You might have to learn mobile development, full stack development. Like it's just going to be such a big portion of your life, and you just have to be flexible. So I think honestly, like working in as many like projects, groups, all of that is in itself just going to be like, just take as much out of it as you can. I know it's kind of a broad blanket statement, but like it's good experience is good experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Even, you know, as a business student, the conceptual lessons are perhaps more valuable than the specific things, and you have to learn how to apply those things in a broader context for any degree, I think, you know, whether it's eng physics or, you know, something with much less math like commerce. All right, next question we have for you. At what point did you realize that the startup journey wasn't going to work?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think it kind of comes down to, again, like the traction points. So we went from, you know, smart home, from AR to smart home, and we kept going, and we got to the point where we couldn't get consumers. And there gets to a point where, like, when you fundraise, you're going to raise for 12 to 18 months of runway. So you have X money, X amount of time. You have to make it work. Like, you make it work within that timeline. You can always go take more, but like, that's kind of what you're committing to, is to deliver X amount of things in this amount of time. And the big thing for us, kind of like a big sign, was we had 4 months runway left, and like we weren't hitting our metrics. We weren't hitting our goals. We weren't hitting our KPIs. We weren't doing what we were expecting to do, and the market wasn't doing what we expected to do. And we kind of like had to take a step back and like look from different perspectives, and, you know, talk to advisors back in Silicon Valley, like Alex and Jordan at Co.Labs, and like, you know, what, like, is this going to work? And it was kind of like, no, this particular idea probably isn't. So it was really interesting having an entire team, because at this time we hired like 4 people, which I know isn't huge, but for like a startup, we're like, you know, we went from like 2, 3 up to like 8 or so. And we're like all sitting there and we're like, hey, well, like, we're literally now just going to take what we have, and like, it's not going to work. Like, it's probably not, we need to think of something else. So we pivoted. We actually pivoted one more time. We tried one more kind of app that was a bit more of a long shot, but it was something that like was more near and dear to all of our hearts at the team we had at the time, which was helping other people. So we went to actually build an app that would essentially remind people to do certain tasks that they wanted to do, but do them through a conversational AI that made it seem less like an annoying task you get at 8 p.m. every night, and more like a friend, like reminding you to do something, and you could like bet with friends and stuff like that. And Alex,
Yeah,
you actually,
yeah, I was going to say, you know, that it was actually one of the things that inspired me to actually start running again, because I knew that if I didn't submit this thing, that I was going to get this notification, and I was going to have to report back saying I didn't run. And so I remember specifically, there was one night, it was like 11 p.m. and I'm like, oh, I'll try not to swear, but I was like, oh crap, right? I was like, I have to run before the end of today, or else I'm gonna have to owe Jordan, who I was competing against, money, Jordan Duchek of Co.Labs. And yeah, so I went for a little 5K run at 11 p.m., which like is honestly not fun or advisable, I think, in like regular, like if we're talking about like healthy ways to stay active. I don't know if that fits the criteria, but certainly it inspired me too. It was a lot of fun to use. So
yeah, I mean, now you run more than I do. I can't even keep but yeah, no, so like we hit these points, and there's points where you just have to like take a step back and be like, is this going to work or not? And if it isn't, you have a couple of choices. You keep trying to force it, which sometimes is the right call. Like, you do have to believe in your product, and you have to try to move mountains, but sometimes you need to pivot, and sometimes you need to try one more thing. And then there's other times where you just have to realize that, like, hey, we gave it our shot. And that's a really hard thing to do. But like, when we raised money, we raised a pre-seed and then a seed after. And like, we took money from investors, and it was hard to say like, hey, like, you know, we're stopping these like product lines. But at the same time, like, the investors know what they're investing in. They know the risks. I mean, like 99% of all startups fail. Even when you get to a Series A, it's like 75% of all Series A companies. That's typically companies that raise like, I don't know, an average 2 to 15 million, depending on where they are. 75% of them sell for a penny on the dollar. So like they know what they're getting into. And honestly, like sometimes you just have to say, like, we gave this our all, we gave it the best, we're going to take what we learned and we're going to do the next thing. But like, we can't drain ourselves out. We can't, like, we're just going to overstress ourselves. And like, there's a time where you cut it, right? And for us, that was a number of things. It was consumer issues, it was runway issues, it was, getting alignment across teams and investors. Like, it's really like the startup is like it's a relationship. You have relationships with your board, your investors, your coworkers, and like if everyone's not aligned, you're gonna have friction points. And like those are things that like you have to solve early or they will like fester.
Yeah, I still remember going for hour-long walks with you, trying to, talking you through kind of your thought process, and honestly just being a listening board more than anything. I think, again, it speaks to that terms of like, going out on your own terms and just understanding, when you've hit that final wall. And I think it's a brave thing to do, because a lot of times founders will go until like every option is exhausted. And I think sometimes you just need to allow yourself the space to kind of refocus. So naturally segueing into getting that space, and Juan Yepes, we're going to answer your question here around, are you still operating in the SaaS tech sector? He is, and we'll kind of chat about that next phase. So it's like, now you're obviously not doing this. So what are you doing, and what is it like owning your own thing as opposed to working for someone else?
Absolutely. So to answer the question, so yeah, I am still operating in the SK tech sector. So I'm a product manager at 7 Shifts. For those of you who aren't familiar, we're a restaurant scheduling company here in the city. And it was a really interesting transition. I mean, for me, I went into product management because I wanted to essentially learn the skills to come up with the ideas and the products that customers wanted and were validated that would bring value to them. Because that's kind of what a product manager is. You are working with like design, engineering, development, everyone else to decide what to build next. So it was a really interesting like next step, I guess.
Yeah.
A big thing that does change though is there's a change in ownership. And we can touch on this a bit more of like, as the things you learn as being a founder. But when you are a founder, you're getting people to buy into your vision, and you do that through early stakeholders, early workers. You give out options and shares, and it's really interesting to see that from the other side, because now I'm coming into a company like 7 Shifts, which was like post Series A, B, and I'm coming in as like the 100th and some employee, and I have a part of the app that I own, but it's in a different way than as a CEO, right, for my own company. So it's been a really interesting journey. I think one of the biggest things I've learned is like the edge you get is being a previous founder. So like for myself, I honestly believe that you get a big edge being a previous like startup founder, because you learn so much stuff. Like I mentioned before, you have to wear multiple hats. So you learn things like how runway works, how a Series A works, how a Series B works, how due diligence works, what debt financing is, what equity financing is. And I know a lot of people would be like, oh, well, like how much does that matter in, a junior dev position at a company? But it does, because you're going to have insights into how to make decisions. And this is kind of one of those things that I think it was Adam who asked before, where it's like, what are the key takeaways? And it's like, they're all takeaways, because when you come to this company, you can learn, how are my actions going to affect our runway? How do we make our investors happy and our consumers happy? How do we, how do I work with my manager? How do I work with the people under me? And like all of those things together. So it's been really interesting to see the transition between like working for your own company versus working for another company, and kind of applying the ownership rules that you kind of pick up.
Yeah, I think like as a founder, you kind of immediately have an appreciation for the entire business, even when you come back into a company working for a part of it. Is just like you can understand and empathize with some of the more, broader aspects. So when you fundraise, you understand what that means, beyond just being like, oh, well, we'll hire more people, or, maybe we'll get nicer, monitors or whatever it is. You actually can appreciate the business inputs. And I think, something that we've seen is when founders come in here and they their startup flares out or whatever, they're some of the most employable people on the planet, because other founders know that they understand exactly what that means to grow a company. And I think it speaks to why you are basically like the second that you announced that you're winding down the company, that it was like, okay, well, it's not like, let me apply for 100 jobs. It's like, what do I do next? And you have a little bit more of a locus of control because those skills are in short demand or short supply, I think.
Yeah, I think that's like a really interesting thing you bring up, because like a lot of startups look for good tech, good talent. And like a lot of that talent, people can come, but they also have to be a little like, they have to be able to swallow the risk. And finding those people can be hard. And by going through the startup scene, you learn so much stuff that then makes you more approachable to do it again. And people know that you're driven and you want to learn and you want to go through these places. So yeah, it was really interesting to, wind down the company and talk to people that were previous colleagues and like, hear, what they were looking for, talk to them about like what they could do. And kind of like, it honestly felt like it was more like, what do I want to do next to grow my skills versus like, where can I go next? It was like, where do I want to go? And that was like a really cool, I think, advantage that you get going through your own company.
Totally. And absolutely, especially after raising money, hiring people, kind of going through the full McCoy there. Adam Jones has another question. So he's currently our, what do they call it? The king of the hill for FAQ right now, or Q&A rather. Said, what are the main differences in how you approach learning a skill in order to immediately apply it to a project in a short time frame versus learning a skill in the more conventional academic way? So I think the question, you're just, trying to determine the rate of learning by doing something versus learning it.
Yeah, and another great question. So I think this comes back to one of the things I was saying about just being in a startup is you have to be okay with failing and you have to be okay with people criticizing you. You can't do things perfect in a startup. And I think it's Peter Thiel, I think, who said in 0 to 1, if you aren't like mortally embarrassed by your beta or what you're launching,
you're at least too late.
And like, honestly, that is the same with everything. If you're building something in like natural language processing, you're going to want to like know it inside and out and read the textbooks and take online courses, but you don't have the time to do that. What you have to do is try to like mock something together, show it to people. They're going to like, the good people will tell you nicely what you did wrong. Other people will like mock you for it, but you take those criticisms and then you keep learning and you keep applying it. And like, you have to move fast. So like, I think, again, a big thing of learning is like when to position yourself between others and learn from them, when to bring other people to do it. And like, when are the big things that you just like, you have to spend more time. A friend of mine always said that some people would get stuck in analysis paralysis, where essentially like they just like, they get stuck. They just keep looking at it and they're waiting for the perfect answer. But again, you should be like mortally embarrassed by what you're doing and like, you just need to do it.
Yeah, and the worst people are the people who will just tell you everything's good. I think that it's sometimes a trap that we get stuck into, where we ask for feedback and people tell us they'll use it, and they're just saying that so you stop talking to them, frankly. And I think, it's like what Tyler said, like the no's are much better than the yeses, and the this is shit is actually even better than the no's, because it allows you to actually get some raw, honest criticism. So I totally agree. And yeah, the Peter Thiel, the 0 to 1 book is fantastic for anyone who hasn't read it. Moving to kind of the next question here. What's in the future? So we've talked about kind of everything up until now. You have now, if you come and like, I don't want you to like perjure yourself into 7 shifts right now, but if you come across another idea that seemed like is worth pursuing, would you choose to be a founder again? Is it like, I'm done, I figured it out, it's emotionally traumatizing and too tough, or is there an opportunity to jump back into the founder's seat for you?
Yeah. So like, to be honest, like, yeah, the startup phase there were traumatizing times where like stuff was hard. Like you stayed up late, you put your blood, sweat, and tears, and it didn't work. But it was also the funnest thing I've ever done. I've never learned more doing something in my life. I've never met more similar and driven people. and like it was exhilarating. Like it was so much fun. So yeah, absolutely. Like if the right idea, the right team came along, and like the situation was, I would never say perfect, because like I said, you have to be willing to take risks, and sometimes you have to drop other things to pursue things like this. But 100%, I would absolutely do it. I think it was one of the best experiences I've done, and honestly, like one of the best ways to learn is by failing or by trying and like taking those things and doing them again, but in a different way, obviously. But yeah, I would love to have another opportunity to take everything we've learned the first time around, or the first 5 times around with all the pivots, depending on how you count them, and take another shot at it.
Yeah, it's the founder itch. It doesn't really ever go away, right? We can apply metaphysical cream to it, but it never really goes away. Zach Friesen has a question for us. And again, anyone here who has a question will be, there's only a little bit of time left. So if something's in there, just please make sure to send them in. Zach Friesen says, how did you go about market validation? Looking back, would you have gone about it differently? Well, I know the answer to the second part, but I'll let you take it.
So, oh man, it's so interesting. So at first we were just talking to people. We were like, when we were in the Valley, we were just talking to other people we were meeting. We were trying to find investors online who were like heavy investors in the space that we were looking in, because we wanted to know, like, do they see something that we don't see in this idea? Like, are we going to go and pitch this company? And the one company was one of the top construction VCs in the US. And they were invested in over like $100 billion in like companies. Like they touched like 1/3 of all real estate buildings. And it was like, okay, well, like, let's go talk to them. And if we pitch them the idea and they just laugh, like, we know we're missing something. So like that was a really interesting tactic. Talking to people was an interesting tactic. I think a mistake we made early on was we were going to people who were more technical, or were friends, or who were in the tech scene. And that's difficult. Honestly, even when you meet people in the street and you tell them your idea, they're going to want to be like, no, man, that's a great idea. Because like a lot of people don't want to hurt your feelings. Alex mentioned that 0 to 1 book that I mentioned earlier, but another good book is called The Mum Test. And it's literally just about how to talk to people and get them to essentially say no. Because like Alex mentioned earlier, 1 no is worth more than 1,000,000 yeses, because that's telling you the right way to go. So yeah, we did a variety of things. You can read all sorts of books, and I don't think anyone has the best way to prove market validation. It's one of the hardest things, is to prove that your product has traction. And I think we'll touch on that in a bit, but I think just like pushing harder and honestly being more doubting our idea more earlier on would have helped us like find out and like rough some of those corners sooner.
Yeah. I've been told that there's a correction to my earlier attempt at a joke, that it's not metaphysical, it's metaphorical. Like that to be on the record here. All right. We have Amirali Zand, who has a question for you, Tyler. He says, I want to know what hard or soft skills helped you during this journey to build your company. So maybe let's contextualize this. Let's just say like the most important hard skill, the most important soft skill that kind of helped during the startup journey.
Yeah. Most important soft skill is dealing with people. You have to be able to talk to people. Even if you're like an introvert, like you just have to be able to put yourself out there a bit, talk to people, because in the end, they're investing in you. People aren't going to join your company if you can't convince them that you're going to take them there, or you're going to build this thing. You need to be able to deal with people, or you need to have someone who can. Hard skill, I mean, depends the position. I was in a technical role before going to a business, and like I would say just like understanding how to program is like a huge deal. You don't have to know the right language or the right platform or how to do like ML or AR or VR. You just need to understand like programming languages so that you can pick up and learn and build something. Because at the end of the day, you need to have a product too. So you need to build something.
Yeah, I think it's a fun thing, right? Like when we talk about being able to communicate with people, our first instinct is always, well, I'm like, that's the customers or my stakeholders or my investors. But when you talk about learning code, what you're saying too is you have to be able to communicate with your own team. If I'm going to ask my technical team to go build something, if I don't understand the limitations of what I'm asking, that could cause gigantic, not only miscommunication, but friction between the team too. So I think it speaks to say that, everything kind of funnels up in your ability to communicate effectively, which I think is a bunch of fun. We're going to take 2 more questions here, and then we'll move into the last planned question we had. Miles Wright, are there any good books you would recommend for starting a first business, or any other, we'll call it any other resources that you would recommend?
Yeah, I was actually just looking at my bookshelf to see which ones are some of my favorite.
I figured it was either a cat or a dog coming into the room, or your bookshelf. So yeah, no, nice.
Yeah, bookshelf. I honestly will stand by 0 to 1. It's a great book. It gives you a lot of the idea of what's happening in the Valley and the mindset. Same with The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, another great book. Crossing the Chasm is a great one for like trying to figure out your marketing and like, do you actually have, like, can you get over that gap and get customers? What other ones? This is a small book I really enjoyed called The Dip. It's all actually about like the end of it's a small like pictured book. It's like 60 pages, but honestly, I read it near the end and like it was a great read. Just makes you think from different perspectives. I would even read it halfway through because you should always have those different perspectives. And then I also really enjoyed Elon Musk's autobiography. Or any autobiography like a Steve Jobs or anything, because you're just going to, again, like learn a lot of the challenges that they had. The only other thing I would say as a tip is like, if you aren't technical, you don't need to have a CS or an engineering degree to know how to program. Like, take some online courses. They're free, especially now with COVID. There's a lot of great resources, and you can go out there and take like an intro to Python class, intro to web dev class. And like, that's huge for product validation. And at least like it helps you talk with the technical team, even if you're not the one doing it. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember Grasshopper being a resource that got shared around Co.Labs a lot, as like a free app that literally can teach you the fundamentals of coding very quickly. And even in my role where, we're running a nonprofit that helps tech companies, trying it out for 3 months, I think has vastly improved my ability to communicate to teams. This is a fun one just because I think the answer is pretty obvious to me, and I'd be interested in hearing your opinion. How do NDAs factor? So this is Riel Castro Zinti. How do NDAs factor into your search for investors, partners, and collaborators? Did you ever, one sec, let's just make this yes or no. Did you ever use an NDA?
Yeah, so I knew you were going to ask that. So no, when you come to the Valley, the first thing they'll tell you is like, no one's going to sign an NDA. They've probably heard your idea a couple times. They're not in the business of taking an idea and spinning it on their own. We never use NDAs.
And that's the advice we'd always give too, is, they're not really, they're only enforceable after someone does something with your idea anyways. So, the idea of a startup's advantage competitively is your ability to move fast and execute on a thing. And I think people often overestimate how much other people care to execute on someone else's idea. It's just, very infrequently you'll see it. Last question we'll ask, and Stephanie Ortinsky, God, I'm really hoping. She said, will you list these books, please? I missed a couple. Yeah, we'll follow up with you with a list of some of these books. Anyone who's in this session, we'll make sure to communicate that, just because, yes, obviously, typing it as we said them is probably not effective. Adam Jones, the last question we'll take for Q&A before moving on to our final question here. Again, King of the Hill, third question. Realizing that while it's important to learn fast a lot of the time, do you also take time to learn certain foundational technical concepts very deeply?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends what you're going into. And like, I think Alex and I will touch a bit about this, I think, in the last question, but there are some like technical concepts that if your startup is like a moonshot and you are going to rewrite or create a new like natural language processing bot, you need to understand at a very deep level. Like, you need to be an expert to do that. If you're building something like you want to be the next like scheduling company or the next calendar company, or you want to make something like that people at like store, like consumers will use, and it's not really technical, not really. I mean, you should have a deep understanding of like what makes the market and what the competitive landscape looks like, and like how you're going to position yourself. But unless you're going into that sort of like you're making a SpaceX, a lot of the concepts you probably won't even need to know too deeply.
Yeah, I think, generally our perspective is always like, if you're doing a good job as a founder, you should be able to convince someone to go do that thing rather than use your time and resources to, pretend like you're really going to go deep. Like if you're doing like what Tyler said, like some super complicated, like natural language processing bot, and you don't have those skills off the start, you're probably never going to develop those skills in the time frame needed to launch the product. So your success as a company is going to be your ability to understand those things and have conversations that are intelligible, but to probably have people on your team who are experts. If you're trying to become an expert in natural language processing in a very short amount of time, I have some pretty bad news for you. It's gonna be pretty tough. But there's a balance. I think that's the key here. All right, last question, kind of key takeaway here. What makes an idea worth pursuing? How do you know when to continue and when to stop? I think foundationally here, when we were naming this episode, we're in calling it Love is Blind. I think this is the important part: is how do you know when to stop? What makes it worth doing? What makes it not worth doing?
Yeah. So in my mind, and like this is just my opinion, but in my mind, there's kind of two sorts of ideas. There is like the sales validated product. So this is something that you have built, you've taken to consumers after you've built it, and they've literally paid you for it. You are building something that might not be the next SpaceX, but it is like a QuickBooks. You are building something that is functional and provides a definitive value for customers, and you are making revenue. When is that worth it to stop? If you're not making revenue, if you can't differentiate yourself, if you're having trouble like raising money or anything like that, then I think those are good signals that you need to like have a really candid conversation with your customers to find out what you're doing wrong. Or are you missing the mark, or is the space too crowded? Or maybe there's just not value there, or you have to pivot. And like that is for something that is like a very like simple like sales validated product. The next one, I think the second type of idea or startup is like a moonshot. Again, this is like a giant SpaceX company or like Tesla or any company like that. And you're building something fundamentally new and exciting, but also very difficult. Things like this, like they're very different companies because you need to have the resources to build it and to prove it. So you need to raise like large amounts of money up front. I would categorize what we were doing more as like a moonshot because we were doing something that was very different. We raised money without a product, without any customers, and we raised money off the idea that we were going to build something so great that we would eventually have a ton of customers. The hard thing with moonshots is the whole time you're building something, everyone's going to tell you it's not going to work. And you have to have a lot of drive and momentum to push through that. But again, I think you just have to keep like open eyes, keep an open perspective, look at what your shortcomings are and try to solve them. Keep trying to solve them one problem at a time. And you're either going to solve them all and be successful, or you're going to run into eventually problems that just like you can't solve. The market isn't there, or like people aren't using it, or you can't get your churn numbers low enough. So I think just like, I don't know. I think like there's a lot of reasons that makes an idea worth pursuing. And when to know when to stop is just a matter of like, keeping those communication channels open, talking to people, keeping a real like eye on everything, and just like making hard decisions. It's really hard. But
yeah, summed up in a terrible analogy. You gotta know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to run, right? This is going to be concluding the end of the session here. We'll welcome you back shortly, but before we do, I just want to say thanks again, Tyler. We had the pleasure of working with Tyler over the course of almost 2 years in Co.Labs, and it's been amazing to see what you've done at 7 Shifts. It's been amazing to have you on the call for an hour today. I'm sure that if anyone wants his contact info, we can send it out later. But thanks again, really appreciate it, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And yeah,
awesome. Thank you so much.
Video now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tyler and Alex. I think that was a ton of really great insight